Be a good time to wake up out by the divinely designed extravaganza. قوانين up on the Duchan, why ain't we there? Labiyam on the Malo, why ain't we there? Tamid and the Azara, why ain't we there? Dabra Melech with the Shminis, man, I take close. Grabbing a Hasidic mental, see it's essential. Understand the reason he sent you. This is a vessel, this is all introspective. Surprising, rising on a positive vector. Why in your sector? My hydrant inventor. If you sound moronic, it's a sign of defectors. A Heligas on your style, like Hannibal Lecter. Got him bouncing like Kedusha, making your neck hurt. I run up like a worm in your network, stuck up in your memory. Think you can flex words? I admire fire, let me give you a test first. I give you the parrot, you give me the 10th verse. Don't ask Kashas, go to base and just learn. Stick a blank disc inside your face and press burn. Taking the Kedusha, bringing it westward. Less than a sixth of this'll make your head turn. Check the sign of the vital, Lachan the style, yo. Inside of the Bible, Nichtav B'tzad on the side of my bio. I'm leaving MCs comatose like Shibo. What? I'm on your last shown like pasta, clinging to the Eitz Chaim just like Rastas. Kadishasa la'as for the chashka nachasa. Keep it kosher, baby, with Charedish style. Taking the tradition and I'm making it now. Changing my position as I'm breaking it down. Exchange of television for a saintlier ground. My people want salvation now. Kohanim up on the Duchan, why ain't we there? Labiyam on the Malo, why ain't we there? Tamid and the Azara, why ain't we there? Dabra Melech with the Shminis, man, I take goes. Hidden living in my grill, all in my video. Understand my words and they still don't hear me though. Bounce to the bass for you bounce to the bass. Come reckless to stetlich with pshetlich for days. Strictly 613 what I'm selling me. Love the Torah like Dr. Brown loves celery. What's Neshama and Rastafari liberty? All up in your yichus like a dog with a pedigree. Watch as I work this style with a purpose. Halakhic observance, Hasidish and Litvish don't witness the sickest. Whole Edel Tamis, rock on see that this kid's hot. Rizcha the Sifra, it kara yitzra. La'ela ashikla, l'chaze ashikra. Echta b'piska, l'b'kabe achibra. Waiting for Mashiach, I'll be shias by me. All my holy people in the system gon' wait up. Ain't you sick of living in division, yo, change up. Speaking of my scorner and you all up in the ratio. Act like it's tax law, bro, it's a safer. Life is defined by the words on the paper. Kohanim up on the Duchan, why ain't we there? Labiyam on the Malo, why ain't we there? Tamid and the Azara, why ain't we there? Dabra Melech with the Shminis, man, I take close. I found Pisha, yes, my meha. All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found Pisha, yes, my meha. All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found Pisha, yes, my meha. All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found Pisha, yes, my meha. All my people gon' wait. So just avoid the hate. Orthodox boss a lot, open up the gates. It's still goalless if you ballin', so give up the game. He's gonna bring us all the cards to Jerusalem. Build the base, unite the nation, make it all shalom. All the pieces in the place are gonna see the gleam. So just praise his name. All the Yidden gonna be there, Zaman inshallah. Malachim and Shemayim all that heard our dawah. Giloy on Reboy, not this hot saga. The secular is gonna be absurd like Dada. This will be a good time to wake up out by the divinely designed extravaganza. Kohanim up on the Duchan, why ain't we there? Labiyam on the Malo, why ain't we there? Tamid and the Azara, why ain't we there? Dabra Melech with the Shminis, man, I take close. Grabbing a Hasidic mental, see it's essential. Understand the reason he sent you. This is a vessel, this is all introspective. Surprising, rising on a positive vector. Why in your sector? My hydrant inventor. If you sound moronic, it's a sign of defectors. A Heligas on your style, like Hannibal Lecter. Got him bouncing like Kedusha, making your neck hurt. I run up like a worm in your network, stuck up in your memory. Think you can flex words? I admire fire, let me give you a test first. I give you the parrot, you give me the 10th verse. Don't ask Kashas, go to base and just learn. Stick a blank disc inside your face and press burn. Taking the Kedusha, bringing it westward. Less than a sixth of this'll make your head turn. Check the sign of the vital, Lachan the style, yo. Inside of the Bible, Nechta Betzad on the side of my bio. I'm leaving MCs comatose like Shivo. What? I'm on your last shown like pasta, clinging to the eighth Chaim just like Rasta. Skitty Shasta La As for the Chashka Nachasa. Keeping it kosher, baby, with Haredish style. Taking the tradition and I'm making it now. Changing my position as I'm breaking it down. Exchange of television for a saintly ground. My people want salvation now. Kohanim up on the Duchan, why ain't we there? Labiyam on the Ma'ala, why ain't we there? Tamid and the Azara, why ain't we there? David Melech with the Shminish Menatech goes hidden living in my grill, all in my video. Understand my words and they still don't hear me though. Bounce to the bass for you bounce to the bass. Come reckless to stetlich, whip shetlich for days. Strictly 613, what I'm selling be. Love the Torah like Dr. Brown loves celery. Was Neshama and Rastafari liberty. All up in your yichus like a dog with a pedigree. Watch as I work this style with a purpose. Halachic observance, Hasidish and Litvish don't witness the sickest. Whole Edel HaMizrach won't see that this kid's hot. Rizcha the Sifra, Itkara Yitzra, La'ela Ashiklam, Nochazei Ashifra, Echta Baptiska, L'Kavei Achibra. Waiting for Mashiach, Apo Pishias Bamei, huh? All my holy people in the system gon' wait up. Ain't you sick of living in division? Yo, change up. Speaking of my scorner and you all up in the ratio. Act like it's tax law, draw, it's a safer. Life is defined by the words on the paper. Up on the Duchan, why ain't we there?
All right, shalom everyone, and welcome to OneShul. My name is Rabbi Patrick. In my casual work outfit today, give me just a sec to go on ahead and get some things set up here. We're using a new chat room system, and hopefully it's working okay. It looks like some people are having trouble. I'm sort of working with two screens as well, so hopefully everything will be okay. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay, and all of that good stuff. So let me get my mouse over here and get all set up. And let's see. Sorry for the delay. So we're testing out so many new stuff all at once that either everything is working perfectly or everything is working terrible. I'm not quite sure yet. So give me just a moment here. Make sure that that I got all this set up. Okay, so looks like everything is going okay. All right. So if you are new to OneShul, if this is your first time here, in the bottom right-hand corner of the website, you're going to see a little orange box, right, in the bottom right-hand corner, and it says OneShul chat room, and it says join the chat room. So if you click on that, you can join the chat room. And so that'll give you the opportunity to log on, to ask questions, all of that good stuff. It looks like now we're starting to get some people in the chat room. Bottom right-hand corner, if you're looking at the screen and you're thinking, where did the chat room go? The chat room was always to the right of the viewing screen and or the streaming window rather, and now all of a sudden it's gone and OneShul is just not the same. Well, it's because we made an improvement. So again, bottom right hand corner, orange box, it says OneShul chat room. Click on it, and that will go on ahead and get you all set up, and you'll be able to watch the chat. Okay, so starting to see some people coming in. That's cool. Feeling good about it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, best thing you can do would be to go on ahead and go into that chat room. Otherwise, it's totally not going to make sense to you. So, all right. So, you learn, right? You try new things. You see what works. That's why we're doing this class. Not only because we want to learn about Rebbe Nachman, but also because we want to test out new technology and see how it goes. And it looks like let's see, guest 192, hello, from Brooklyn, hello, Jonathan. So, the video is going to be really weird because you're going to see the side of my face as I look at the chat room over there, as opposed to on my computer where I'm streaming from. But, we try the best we can. So, great. Okay, now I think we're ready to get started. Jewish Standard Time. You always have to start 5 minutes late. And everyone who showed up 5 minutes late is in Jewish time 5 minutes early. So, that helps as well. So, welcome to OneShul. Again, my name is Rabbi Patrick. This is a class on Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. Troy normally teaches this class. Unfortunately, Troy couldn't make it. He was having some computer issues, so we wish his computer a refuah shlema, a healing of, I don't know, computers I guess have a mind, and I guess they have a body. I don't know about a spirit, but anyway, so let's see. Go on ahead and get started here. Rebbe Nachman. So what I'd like to do is in the chat room, if you know anything about Rebbe Nachman, or if you think you know anything about Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, go ahead and post it. And also post where you're from. In theory, the chat room tells us where you're from, but as our friend in Brooklyn has just told me, they are not in Brooklyn. So I guess the chat room does not tell you where you are from. So looks like we've got Georgia. Let's see. I know we have someone from Florida because I know who that person is. So welcome. Where else are you from? As I get my notes set up here. And also, what do you know about Rebbe Nachman, if anything? And by the way, the appropriate answer if you don't know anything about Rebbe Nachman is, I don't know anything about Rebbe Nachman, and that's why I'm here. Let's see. We have George, who is in Kansas. All right. So, let's see. So we've got Kansas, we've got Massachusetts, we've got 2 people I know in Georgia and 1 person in Florida. Okay, we've got someone who's in Queens. So this is how you know someone is from New York, is if you say they're from Brooklyn, you say, I'm not in Brooklyn, I'm in Queens. So thank you so much, person in Queens. We're glad to have you here. We're glad to have everybody here. All right, we're glad to have our friend who's in Lawrence, Kansas. Very cool town, Lawrence, Kansas, by the way. I've been there before. Great downtown area and all of that stuff. So anyway, let's talk about Rebbe Nachman. Does anyone know anything about Rebbe Nachman? And as I said before, an appropriate answer is, I don't know anything about Rebbe Nachman, Rabbi Patrick. Let's move beyond that question. And I'm guessing that's what most people have to say about that, is I don't know anything. Okay, so Jonathan says, I know a bit about him and have talked to some Breslovers here and there. I've read a couple of Breslov books and Art Green's Tormented Master. So Art Green is a rabbi affiliated with Jewish Renewal, wrote a book about Rebbe Nachman called Tormented Master. So our friend here says, didn't believe Nachman had people sing songs. I don't think that he actually did. I think that was a later development. And we're going to actually talk about that. Okay, so knows a little bit about him, talked to some Breslovers. There's this thing about singing, whether or not Rebbe Nachman had people do that, I guess, is in question. So, okay, so we have a few thoughts. So let's think about this from 3 points. Okay, so here we go. 3 key things about Rebbe Nachman. Number 1, he was a Hasidic rabbi, founder of the Breslov sect of Hasidic Judaism. Second point, his legacy is the legacy of his followers' understanding of him. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time because it's a little bit of a tongue twister. Rebbe Nachman's legacy is the legacy of his followers' understanding of him. His followers were the ones who made his legacy. Right? And the third point, his core beliefs were the intimacy of the individual with God, angst versus joy, and the solitary life. And really, when I say solitary life, I mean the solitary prayer life. So, Hasidic rabbi, founder of Breslov sect. His legacy is the legacy of his followers, and his core beliefs were about intimacy, joy, and this idea of solitary religious prayer. Okay, so who is this guy? Who is Nachman of Breslov? So he was born in 1772, died in the year 1810, so didn't live to be that old, actually. So he lived to be 38 years old. Scares me when I consider the fact that I'm 31. So as I mentioned before, he's the founder of Breslov Hasidic Judaism. So in order to know what Breslov Hasidic Judaism is, we have to talk about what Hasidic Judaism is. So, like many of the great rabbis of this time and going forward, Rebbe Nachman was part of a rabbinic lineage. Now, rabbinic lineages go two different ways. One is that you are the disciple of a great rabbi. And if you look in the Talmud, rabbis often quote the names of other rabbis when they give out their sort of ideas about things. And that's a very Jewish thing, is to say, you know, didn't Rabbi so and so say in the name of Rabbi such and such, right? It's a very Jewish thing to do. Um, so whenever you find yourself with an idea about Judaism or a belief in Judaism, if you want to really validate how you feel, regardless of what movement you belong to and regardless of sort of how you understand Judaism, it's very valuable to do it in the name of another rabbi, and ideally to even go back further than that. And there is a Jewish belief that the further you go back in these Jewish ideas, in these rabbinic ideas, eventually you'll hit Mount Sinai. So, one way of doing that is to be the disciple of a rabbi. The second is to be the son of a rabbi or the grandson of a rabbi. And in Rebbe Nachman's case, he was the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidic Judaism. So you can't talk about a pedigree of sort of rabbinic lineage without getting into the idea of being the great-grandson of the guy who came up with Hasidic Judaism. It does not get any better than that. So, what's Hasidic Judaism? So, Hasidic Judaism, if you ask Hasids, is one thing. If you ask non-Hasids, it's something else. So, I'm going to say this in as historical a perspective as possible and to try to keep as much for lack of a better word, ideology out of it. So if it sounds like what I'm saying is very sanitized, there's a reason for it. And it's because I don't want to be accused of leaning in one direction or the other. So, Hasidic Judaism was a movement that really focused on, for lack of a better word, the average Joe or the average David or the average Shmuel in Jewish life. And it was the idea that Judaism had become too intellectual, that it was too focused on study, and that your average, I don't know, dairy farmer was being left out of Judaism. I would argue that in a way it was a form of kiruv, it was a form of outreach in Judaism, a very early form of it. The idea basically was that your average life could be filled with great holiness in the same way that studying Jewish texts could be. So what the Baal Shem Tov and other sort of Hasids who gathered around this concept of Hasidic Judaism felt like was that Judaism had been relegated to a scholarly approach, that it was something that the average person wasn't necessarily cleaving to, and that Judaism wasn't so much about how much Torah you knew, but it was about how you lived your life. And the values of how you lived your life in community, really the idea of joy, which Rebbe Nachman really picked up on, the idea that Judaism was not something that was purely academic, it was very much a lived communal experience. Now, that's not to say that Judaism that was sort of going on in the Baal Shem Tov's life was actually super academic. It was, but it doesn't mean that the sort of lay person was completely divorced from it. But the other thing that was interesting about Hasidic Judaism is up to that point, Judaism was very much a regional concept. So you had a rabbi, a rebbe, a chacham, a wise person in each community, and that person basically was Jewish Wikipedia, right? They were the Chabad.org, although Chabad.org is a Hasidic thing, but never mind, you get where I'm going with this. My Jewish learning, let's say, whatever. They were the Judaica encyclopedia for that particular group. And as I mentioned before, rabbinic lineage happened from father to son, father to grandson. If a rabbi only had daughters, then it was the son-in-law. right? The daughters, it was incumbent on them that they would marry someone who would want to become a great Torah scholar. And that rabbi was essentially the community leader. He was the person who was the shliach zibur, although not always. He was the rosh bet din, so he was the head of judgment. So, I'll pull some names here. Let's say George and Jonathan have an argument of some kind, right? Like they go into business together, and one of them has a problem with the other, and they need to resolve it. During this time, and in many times in Jewish history, the secular court, first of all, there was no such thing as a secular court, but the secular court, the court of, the kingdom, usually, didn't care what the Jews did, wasn't interested in them. Jews did not have that kind of legal standing, right? So the rabbi was effectively the head of the Bet Din. The Bet Din is the house of judgment. And that rabbi's job was to oversee these conflicts and to settle these kinds of disputes. So Judaism was very regional. Now, as a friend of mine pointed out, they weren't necessarily little islands. You did have communication back and forth, and you do see in the Talmud in particular, although the Talmud is codified long before the time period we're talking about, you did have some communication about, the community in what would have been called Palestine says one thing, the community in Bavli and Babylon says another thing, and you would have had some regional communication. You had Magidim, you had Darshanim, you had these itinerant traveling preachers, but for the most part, Judaism was very much a whatever the rabbi in your village taught. What's interesting about the Hasids, I would argue, is that they were the first group to really think beyond individual communities. And they would travel from community to community, and the way that they picked up followers was to say, you know what, you can follow us, right? And then you're part of the greater Klal Yisrael, right? It's not about your little community, right? It's not about the Ukraine or a little community in the Ukraine. It's not about a little community in France or whatever the case may be. It's about a greater Jewish community. And so, what the Hasids basically did is they were able to walk across those geographic boundaries and also those cultural boundaries, and to provide a Judaism for people that spoke to the common man, that spoke to the common man's needs, and that also usurped a little bit of the control that the local rabbis had. So it's kind of interesting how that works. So that's basically what we're talking about in terms of Hasidic community, right? So Rebbe Nachman is the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. So his mother was the granddaughter of the Baal Shem Tov. So his lineage to Baal Shem Tov is a matrilineal descent, for lack of a better word. So what did Nachman do? Well, he combined the esoteric teachings of Lurianic Kabbalah. So this is Eastern European Kabbalah. This is not sort of Madonna Kabbalah Center type stuff. Combined that with very in-depth Torah scholarship. His religious philosophy, as I mentioned before, revolved around closeness to God, speaking to God in normal conversation. In fact, the quote that I pulled was that you should talk to God, according to Rebbe Nachman, as you would with a best friend. Rebbe Nachman also believed in self-seclusion. So he believed that, while praying in a minyan was important, he sort of brought this concept of Jewish meditation, the idea of going off into the woods, in some cases screaming at God, is something that some Breslov Hasidim do. Whether or not he actually did that is up for debate. As a couple of people brought up here, it's kind of up in the air what he did and did not actually teach. We have some writings from him, but we don't have any other text that says, here's what the Breslov Hasidim did at the time, right? And this is always tough with any kind of Jewish scholarship. It's true with the Bible, right? Does the Bible prove the Bible, right? Do the teachings of Rebbe Nachman prove that those were what the Nanach people, the Breslovers, did. It's up for debate. Okay, so a little bio about him. So he was born in the Ukraine, as I mentioned before. He's the he's the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov through matrilineal descent. His father, whose name was Simcha, was the son of Rebbe Nachman of, I'm going to totally botch this name up, but it's Horodenka. I'm not so up on my Eastern European shtetls. And was also one of the Baal Shem Tov's greatest disciples, and that's who Rebbe Nachman was named after. So, interesting thing about Rebbe Nachman, he was married at 13 years old. A little creepy, right? But he was married at 13. At one point, he traveled to Israel. He moved back to the Ukraine, and that's when he moved to Breslov, right? People think he was born in Breslov because he is the Breslov rabbi. An important thing to understand about these terms, like Chabad Lubavitch, Breslov, Satmar, Bostoner, is that these Hasidic Rabbonim are named after whatever city they live in, right? So there actually is a rabbi who moved to Boston, and he is known as the Bostoner Rebbe. There is the Bostoner sect of Hasidic Jews. If you like Jewish music, to give you a reference for the Bostoner rabbi, Wylov, Yitz Jordan, who is a rapper, used to be part of the Bostoner Rebbe's sect of Hasidic Judaism, right? So, in terms of Rebbe Nachman, he moved to Bratslav from Israel, and that is where he declared that his disciples would be known as the Bratslav Hasidim. Eventually, he moved to Uman, and if you have a sense of why that word Uman might be important or interesting or something like that, or maybe resonates with you, I'd be curious. Go on ahead in the chat room and say where you've maybe heard that word Uman. He moved to Uman, and sadly he died of tuberculosis at age 38. Important to understand about Rebbe Nachman is that his famous writings were compiled and published after his death. Right, so we don't have books that he published himself. What we have are the collected texts of his students. Now, that's not to say that any of them are forgeries or to say that any of them are suspect. There are rabbis in contemporary society who have had this happen. Rabbi Sherwin Wein, who's the founder of humanistic Judaism, completely different kind of guy than Rebbe Nachman. His last book was published that way. He had written most of the text for it. One of his students, Rabbi Shalom, had sort of taken it and compiled it together, did a lot of editing, and eventually published his book. It's a terrific book. It's called A Provocative People, The Secular History of the Jews. If you're a fan of Jewish history, you may disagree with his perspective because he was very much a militant secular Jew. He's the founder of humanistic Judaism, so, what should you expect, right? But it's a terrific book. I think it should be a required reading by rabbinical students. He did an amazing job, and Rabbi Adam Shalom did an amazing job of editing it. So, anyway, contemporary example of something that happened with Rebbe Nachman. The idea of, texts being compiled after the fact. So, interesting that no one has sort of gathered the thing about Uman. So, I'll say it one more time as I keep sort of going through here. Whether or not the word Uman sounds sort of interesting in terms of Rebbe Nachman. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the themes of his writing. So, Rebbe Nachman encouraged his followers to practice solitude. And there's an interesting quote here from there's an interesting paragraph from myjewishlearning.com. I'll read this to you. So, solitude is defined by Nachman to mean that a man sets aside at least an hour or more during which he is alone in a room or in the field so that he can converse with his Maker in secret, entreating God to bring him nearer to his service. This pouring out of the heart in solitude should be in Yiddish, the ordinary language of conversation. Nachman also stressed the value of worshiping God in man's present circumstances. Too much planning for the morrow is inadvisable even in spiritual matters, and then, quote, "For all man has, ill the world, is the day and the hour where he is, for the morrow is an entirely different world." It's very interesting. The Hasidim are mystics. And it's interesting that when you look at all mystical traditions, they all have some sort of understanding of focusing on the very, very present, believing that the past and the future are somewhat irrelevant, right? So you find in Eastern religion, this is certainly a big part of it, right? The past has already happened. There's nothing we can do about it. The future has yet to come, so there's no reason in worrying about it. So we should be very much present in this moment. And Nachman, saying here that, the idea of praying in the vernacular, in this case it's Yiddish. You have to understand the time in which he's speaking. Yiddish would have been the vernacular language. So you can see why, the influence of the Baal Shem Tov and other Hasidim really sort of being about the Jewish proletariat, let's say. This idea of praying in the vernacular. Why? Because then you don't have to study Hebrew, right? Hebrew was a language that was not interesting with the exception of the Torah. So, let's see. So Jonathan says about Uman, if you write it in Hebrew, it has Aleph, Mem, Nun, like Emunah or Amen. Absolutely. That's absolutely true, and there is a teaching about that. It actually wasn't the one I was thinking of, but I really value that point, because that's something I would have never brought up. So thank you for that. The reason why I brought up Uman is that, as I mentioned before, Rebbe Nachman's students are really the ones who made his legacy. They were the ones who published his work. They're the ones who really, took on his lineage and carried it forward. In a lot of Hasidic movements, you have a continuation up to this day even of current rabbis, of rabbis who are the disciples going all the way back to the founding of these Hasidic movements. And they are acting as the official leaders of those movements. Two groups, Chabad Lubavitch, which is the most recent, and Nachman's Breslov community, are foregoing contemporary leadership, right? There is no Rebbe for Chabad Lubavitch. The last Rebbe was Menachem Schneerson. He passed away. They never had another Rebbe. Going even farther back in time to Rebbe Nachman, they never had a successor. When people talk about Rebbe Nachman, they talk about Rebbe Nachman the same way that the Bostoners and other groups who have living rabbis, the Satmar, they talk about the Rebbes in that way. The same way that Chabad Lubavitch talks about Menachem Schneerson, and it's as if they are still alive to this day, right? Certain people's legacies are like that. Rebbe Nachman's legacy is like that, contrasting against Schneerson. Same idea, there are just certain personalities that just overwhelm, and there's no reason to bring on another leader at that point. So, the reason why I brought up Uman is that you've probably heard Rebbe Nachman's group, his students, his disciples, on YouTube. So one of the big things about the Breslov Hasidim is that they love music. It all sort of goes into their sense of joy. And we'll get more into it when I read the actual texts that we're going to ponder about. But I wanted to tell you a little bit how the Nanach people operate, which is a lot of times they do flash mobs. They get into these vans or these cars, and they have these big speaker systems on top of the vans, and they play very loud music. Usually techno today, but you have guys who play guitar or whatever. There's a band called Moshiach Oi, who are like a hardcore metal punk band, and they are, I think at least half of them are Breslov Hasidim. So this, music as being part of the joy of life is expressed heavily at Breslov Hasidim. But I wanted to give us an opportunity to take a little break, have a little fun. So we're going to watch this short video of some of Rebbe Nachman's disciples dancing along to some Nanach techno. So, it's absolutely incredible to watch that stuff. I would be curious to know if anyone had ever seen Nanach performances before. So in Israel, what these guys like to do is they will actually go sometimes, not all of them, right? You shouldn't paint everyone with the same paintbrush. But what they'll do is they'll load in their vans and they'll go into like these I guess, sort of intersections, and they'll stop the car and they'll hit the, whatever you call them, the hazard lights or, emergency lights or whatever, and they all pop out while the music, boom, 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 Rebbe Nachman. And then this is where I was talking about Uman. Nachman me Uman, Uman. So you can say that it is Rebbe Nachman of Uman or from Uman. And then there's other sort of teachings around what Uman means, and that it's connected to Emunah and Amen, and there's a lot of different sort of understandings about what Uman is. But, yeah, they're absolutely terrific. So, few readings, just some things that Rebbe Nachman had to say, and these are pulled from a lot of different websites and things like that. If you just Google Rebbe Nachman's name, you're going to find a lot of really terrific stuff. I did pull a few books of mine that have some good stuff. So this is the Tales of Rebbe Nachman. This is a very old version of this book. This is by Martin Buber. Martin Buber wrote The Ten Rungs, which is another really good book of Hasidic tales. He wrote I, Thou, which is a really terrific book. But you can find stuff like this in used bookstores. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon and eBay, stuff like that. This is another one that I had, Dialogue with Hasidic Masters. This is by Maurice Friedman. I think honestly, if you're going to read something like this, you might as well just go online and read, other texts. If you're going to buy a book, you're going to want to buy something like this that has the actual stories compiled. And then also, this big one right here, the Hasidic Anthology. You're almost better off getting something like this, right? If you're going to spend the money, get something like this. I'm very lucky in that one of my rabbis gave this to me. Go to a used bookstore that's in a Jewish neighborhood. You might find something like that. Amazon.com, great, always. Brick and mortar bookstores, kind of hard to find those unless it's a Judaica shop, and even then you're going to have trouble. A lot of Judaica stores, their books tend to focus more on modern Orthodox, not Hasidic, so you're going to have better luck online. Usually I'm a bigger fan of buying the stuff in actual bookstores, but sometimes brick and mortar stores just can't carry that stuff. So, all right, so, and of course you can always go on Breslov.org. Just Google Breslov, Rebbe Nachman, Nanach. You'll find all that stuff. So, I've sort of picked out 3 areas, really. I've picked out faith, angst, and joy. So, in no particular order. On faith, it is better to be a fool who believes in everything than to be so clever that you do not believe anything. If you believe in everything, some of your beliefs may be foolish, but you will also believe in the truth. However, when a person is too clever and does not want to believe in anything, he may begin by ridiculing falsehood and folly, but can easily end up so skeptical of everything that he even denies the truth. So this is an interesting idea here, right? We want to segment out fact and fiction, right? We want to only know what is true, right? What is objectively true. So what Rebbe Nachman is saying here is that it's better to believe everything, right? Even if you have to take some of the not so good stuff, right? It's better to believe in everything and to get some good things than to be skeptical of everything and to get nothing. Probably because, in Rebbe Nachman's mind, the sort of golden nuggets of truth, the diamonds in the rough, outweigh in value believing in things that are false. So it's an interesting idea. So here's a sort of a long piece, and this also includes a psalm. Rebbe Nachman says, faith depends on a person's mouth. We must say that we believe, say it loud. And he quotes Psalms by saying, I will make your faithfulness known with my mouth. When a person is experiencing a crisis of faith, or even passing doubts, it is very beneficial to say aloud, I believe. Simply giving expression to your faith in words is itself an act of faith, and this can bring you to true faith. Likewise, you should also be very careful never to say anything which implies even the slightest lack of faith, let alone total disbelief. Even if you're a believer in your heart, never express disbelief, even as a joke, not even if you are merely quoting someone else to ridicule their opinion. To do this is very wrong and can be very damaging to your faith. Even as a joke, it is forbidden to say anything which implies disrespect to God. So, pretty heavy stuff there, right? Like, we can't even joke about there not being a God. We can't even joke about the idea that we don't have, the truest faith, right? That we don't have every single part of our mind focused on a belief in Judaism, right? Emet ve'emunah, right? So truth, emet, emunah, faith or trust. So it's an interesting idea here. And what he's saying here actually is backed up a little bit by some of the studies recently that have been done in psychology, that if you do something enough times, eventually it will impress something emotional on you. So if you're sad, smile, right? If you are lacking in faith, he's saying here, say, I believe, right? And even if you aren't lacking in faith, continue to say, I believe, because the more you say something, the more and more it's going to impress upon you. It's the idea that our actions create our mental state, not that our mental state creates our actions. Now, this is different, as I had mentioned earlier. Mystics across sort of all religions have very similar ideas, whether it's sort of going into solitude, the mystical experience of connecting to God in a particular way. But I think this is different, right? This is different because what Rebbe Nachman is saying here is that it's not that with your thoughts you create the world, which is the Buddha's sort of perspective. In fact, that actually is a quote, a Buddhist sutra, I think would be the correct word. I'm not sure if I said that right. But that actually it's the other way around, that what you do is going to create how you view the world. So it's interesting stuff there. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about faith here. Let's try angst. So in angst, he talks about having a broken heart. And he says, having a broken heart and being depressed are two quite different things. Depression is rooted in the unholy other side, and God hates it. But being broken-hearted and contrite over one's sins and shortcomings is very dear and precious to God. It would be very good to be broken-hearted all day, but this could easily throw most people into gloom and depression. You should therefore set aside some time each day for heartbreak. Seclude yourself with God for a given time and break your heart with regret over your sins. Then be happy for the rest of the day. It's a very interesting idea here. What he's reflecting, I think, is the fact that we have 3 daily services. You can combine Mincha and Mariv into one service if you want, but technically we have 3. So it's interesting here that he's talking about how you should go and seclude yourself and you should break your own heart. So in theory, if you look at the words of the Siddur, you can find opportunities to break your own heart, right? You can say to God that you have, transgressed, that you have sinned. Guard my tongue from evil. It's one of my favorite lines in the Siddur. And there are, other opportunities as well, right? So that's something that he's sort of reflecting here, right? It's interesting that he says depression is rooted in the unholy other side, and God hates it. Now, I don't have the text to the Yiddish in front of me, and frankly, I don't know Yiddish. I'd have to, look it up in the dictionary. But it'd be interesting to see what they use or what his text uses for other side. So another line here. For the most part, suffering comes to a man through his speech, right? So I just mentioned guard my tongue from evil, right? Guard my tongue from evil is lashon hara. It's evil speech, right? But it's the belief that, true evil comes through saying the wrong things. I was at a class, I guess it was last week, and the rabbi who was teaching talked about the limits of lashon hara. What if you hire someone who is a crook or is going to do a bad job at whatever it is that you asked them to do or hired them to do, and your friend knows that they're a crooked person, right? Does that person have the right to speak up, or is that lashon hara? And what the rabbi taught was that actually, you know, you as the friend can't bring it up, right? It has to be your friend, the person that hired that crook or that, person with a dubious reputation. That person has to say, I've hired this person. And then you're allowed to say, um, you know, whatever the case may be. And there's a few texts that talk about suffering in speech. There's a story about, I forget it exactly, but it's a man that takes feathers and throws them out into the wind, and that speech is like throwing feathers to the wind, that you can't pick them all up, that once it's out there, you've sort of littered the place. So let's see what else people have to say. So Jonathan says, the usual term for other side is pretty literal. Sitra achra. I can't say that Rebbe Nachman uses that term, but I would guess that that was it. Okay, so I don't know. It's a good question. Let's talk about ecstatic joy, so the third piece of our class for the evening. It is a great mitzvah to be happy always. Make every effort to maintain a happy, positive outlook at all times. It is a natural human tendency to become discouraged and depressed because of the hardships of life. Everyone has their full share of suffering. That is why you must force yourself to be happy at all times. Use every possible way to bring yourself to joy, even by joking or acting a little crazy. Goes back to what we were looking at earlier. The idea that with our actions we can create our mental state, right? He's saying, joke around, act a little crazy. If that helps you to have happipiness, do it. And this idea of joy, is really, that's a very Hasidic thing. That's why, when we were watching that video, people dancing around to Rebbe Nachman, right? The song is just Rebbe Nachman. There's nothing to it. And it was bringing them such joy, right? Probably because Rebbe Nachman taught that. Last piece of this. Through an increase in joy, the intellect is strengthened, and food and drink are powerful causes of joy in the heart and distancing sadness and worry. So, in this last piece, we learn about something that's pretty obvious, right? Like whatever we have to do, it's whatever we read about in the previous text there. Whatever you have to do to bring yourself joy, whatever you have to do to distance sadness and worry, that's really what you need to be focused on. So wrapping this all up, we now know that Rebbe Nachman was a Hasidic rabbi, that he's the founder of Breslov Hasidism, that his legacy is the legacy of his followers, right? So we see the dancing people in the cars, out in the streets, dancing around Rebbe Nachman, all that. His legacy is the legacy that his followers made for him, especially since he died at 38. And finally, his core beliefs were about joy, about having an intimacy with God, and finally about the idea of solitude. So, I appreciate everyone coming out for today's class. Hopefully Troy will be back with us soon when he gets his computer fixed. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please send me an email, patrick@punktorah.org, and I will go on ahead and put that into the chat room here. And I'd love to know if you've been to OneShul before, what you think of the new chat room. Literally this is the first time we've used it, so I'd be curious what your thoughts are on it. I think it's pretty cool. There's a couple of changes I need to make to it, but I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, this is very, very, very important. OneShul does not survive without your donations. We have to have help, right? It costs money to have the chat room, to broadcast, the time to have a rabbi, right? All of the website design, right? Keeping the website maintained. Now, volunteers do a great job, and we've done a lot as a volunteer community. But then we also, unfortunately, we can't volunteer to pay for the chat room or to pay for Ustream. Those are things that are just costs. No matter how much volunteering we do, we would have to volunteer to work a job to pay for it, right? So any help that you can be would be fantastic. We ask for a $5 to $10 donation for the classes. So if you scroll down to the bottom, scroll to the top, that was another change we made, you'll see an orange button. It says donate. You can donate anything that you can do. If you can give $5, please give 10. And if you can give $10, please give 20. Really, it's very, very helpful. We are a free community. We're available to anyone, anywhere, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we do it for less than the cost of one rabbi anywhere. So we're very financially prudent. We do an amazing job with volunteer recruitment. We have some amazing volunteers who have done just, terrific jobs. Also, if you are interested in converting Judaism, or if you want to learn more about Judaism and you'd like a more formal approach to study, then I would encourage you to go to one of our partner websites, darshanyeshiva.org. Matter of fact, one of our teachers is actually here tonight in the chat room, and I can't say enough about how terrific Darshan Yeshiva is. Distance learning, conversion program. We also do conversions. They are under the auspices of Reform rabbis as well as post-denominational rabbis. If you are interested in becoming a Jewish spiritual leader, we have classes for that. That's our Darshan program. And then we also have Intro to Judaism and a Torah study program. So we have a lot of great stuff there as well. And you can talk to me about it. If you want to stay in the chat room, Jonathan, I don't know how long Jonathan's going to be available, but you can ask him questions if you want an opinion other than mine. Also, if you are interested in writing, we always need writers at punktorah.org, which is our other website. You can check that out, punktorah.org. So, thank you again very much for coming. Please support OneShul financially. It really helps all of the leaders to know that there is a community that we can lead at. And it also helps the thousands and thousands of people all over the world who don't have a Jewish community, right? Where this is their only Jewish community available to them, right? That's who we're here to help. I'll just tell you real quick, we've got a couple of minutes. I'm lucky. I live in Atlanta. I'm a Jewish communal leader. Every option is available to me, right? Do I need OneShul? Well, I need OneShul because I like it, right? Because I want to teach, because I like the friends that I make. Several of my friends are here tonight. But you know who really needs it? It's the person who lives in Europe, where their Jewish community was devastated by the Holocaust and never recovered, right? It's the person who lives in a predominantly Muslim country who doesn't have a Jewish community. It's the person who wants to convert to Judaism and is afraid to interact with their Jewish community. Or someone, perhaps, who is Jewish, lives near a Jewish community and has been rejected by it. And that happens. We're talking about people who are sick and can't leave the home. We're talking about people who don't have other options, right? If you have options, then take the time to support people who don't have options. Thank you very much.
All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found cliche, it's my may. All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found cliche, it's my may. All my people, we still gon' wait up. I found cliche, it's my may. All my people gon' wait. So just avoid the hate. Orthodox boss, I open up the gates. Still goalless if you're ballin', so give up the game. He's gonna bring us all the cards to Jerusalem.